Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening once again, children of the night, and welcome to another installment of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and tonight we've set the table for a feast of terror, because no matter how safe the shelter, no matter how far you run, there are always creatures with teeth watching and waiting to feed. This is Season 17, Episode 18, and tonight's episode is aptly titled Feeding Grounds. Across 5 chilling tales, we'll be encountering war-born monsters, twisted lovers, lunar echoes, experimental horrors, and storms that don't just tear through the countryside, they hunt. But I'm not the only one lurking behind the microphone tonight. Joining me, as always, is the dark and debonair Malcolm Blackwood. Malcolm?
Debonair? That's new. You must be buttering up before something bites my face off. You're right, though. Tonight's episode is all about predators. Some are obvious, some come with smiles, and some you invite in, thinking they're shelter. Whatever form they take, one thing's for certain. This evening, we're the ones being stalked.
Before we begin tonight's descent into dread, a quick reminder. If you're enjoying the show and want to keep the nightmares flowing early and ad-free, head over to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab at the top of the page, or visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com.
A subscription to our patrons area gets you early access, exclusive content, and a completely ad-free listening experience, starting at just $7.99 a month or less with an annual plan. Help us keep the fires burning and the darkness well-fed.
Thanks so much for your support. Now, on to the show. Our first tale tonight comes to us from Edwin Crane. A man seeks solitude in a remote farmhouse just as a vicious storm rolls in. But the wind isn't the only thing howling. This is Tornado Warning by Edwin Crane. Let me start by saying I know how this sounds. 3 college guys at the end of a semester, a rural, verbo, and a storm warning. Feels like the setup to every backwoods horror cliche imaginable. Believe me, I get it. We were exactly the kind of idiots who would ignore red flags if it meant cheaper booze and no neighbors for 20 miles. And that's what we got, a bargain. The listing called it a reinforced storm shelter home, tucked away in West Texas scrubland, far enough for Lubbock to lose signal, but close enough for a beer run if needed. No reviews, not one. But the photos were glossy and professionally staged. Sunset over a wraparound porch, a slick minimalist kitchen, even a hot tub on the deck. The best part, 2 nights for $129. Total. I booked it. Split 3 ways, it was cheaper than a bar tab. Trevin thought it was hilarious. He said it looked like a murder barn from the outside. Jared called it off-grid aesthetic and brought 4 bottles of Fireball to celebrate the end of finals. None of us were particularly concerned about the lack of internet or a cell phone signal. Trevin joked, "No girls, no Wi-Fi. Guess we're really roughing it this weekend, boys." I remember the message from the owner more clearly now. It didn't seem strange at the time. He thanked us for booking, noted that the low rate was due to it being storm season, and added, "No worries, gentlemen. The structure is reinforced, steel-bolted framing, thermal shielding, industrial roofing. She's held through worse. Just don't ignore the alerts. And don't turn off the intercom, whatever you do. It exists for your safety." There was a smiley face at the end of the message. I remember that, too. We arrived just before sunset. The GPS cut out 5 miles from the property, and we had to finish the drive using screenshots of the directions. When we turned off the main road, the gravel drive narrowed into a patchy, rusted mess that wound past empty fields and a rusted-out grain silo. Then the house came into view. It didn't quite match the listing photos. It was the same house, yes, but it looked more armored. The porch columns were metal, not wood, as in the listing. The windows were covered by heavy-duty retractable shutters currently open. The walls were paneled with some sort of galvanized sheet siding, bolted down tight. Even the foundation had thick steel plates set around the base like a protective coating. "Damn," Jared muttered. "Looks like they're prepping for war, not weather." "Bet it was a meth house before they cleaned it up," Trevin said, already pulling out his phone for pictures. Inside, it smelled faintly of bleach and rust. The layout matched the listing: open floor plan, updated kitchen, 2 bedrooms, plus a finished attic with a few bunk beds. But there were details that didn't sit right. Little things, like the scratch marks in the hallway drywall. They weren't from claws, they were more like shallow gouges, curved like bites. We noticed similar indentations on the door frames, both inside and out. A few looked as if they'd been painted over, poorly. Then there was the black crust in the corners. Not mold exactly, too dry and granular. It was concentrated in the crevices where the floor met the walls, or in the seams around the window frames. "Maybe mice," I offered. Trevin knelt beside one patch. "Mice with fangs and black tar for blood?" We laughed it off. We were 21 and drunk within the hour. The intercom was built into the wall beside the fridge, a square speaker grill with a green light blinking softly, an old-looking label that had been taped next to it. "Storm alert system, do not disable. Weather warnings will be broadcast throughout the property. Alerts are not optional." Underneath, someone had scribbled in pen, "Don't turn me off. Not even for a second." Jared saluted it with his shot glass. "I, for one, welcome our new weather robot overlord." The intercom buzzed briefly an hour later, just static followed by a single low tone. We stood there, frozen, looking at each other, but nothing else happened. Trevin smirked. "Guess Siri's checking in." By midnight, we'd half forgotten it. The drinks kept coming, and someone dug out a Bluetooth speaker. We were playing beer pong on the island counter when the tone returned. Bzzz. Then a crisp, monotone female voice came through. "Tornado warning. Carnivorous system detected. Take shelter. Do not exit structure. Do not open doors." It didn't sound like a Storm Center broadcast. It didn't sound like a person either. More like something trained to imitate one. Jared snorted. Did it just say carnivorous? Trevin doubled over laughing. Damn, that's metal. Cannibal cyclone. I didn't laugh. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. It was hard to explain. Still, I figured it was a weird local thing. Maybe someone had hacked the system as a prank. 10 minutes later, we heard the first howl. It sounded like something huge and wounded, bellowing through miles of empty land. The windows shuddered in their frames, the metal siding groaned. The power stayed on, but the porch light flickered once. Trevin went for the front door. I need to see this. If it's an honest-to-God flesh tornado, y'all know I'm getting that on camera. I stopped him. Dude, it could just be a normal tornado with a creepy alert system. He laughed. Then I want proof for TikTok. The wind howled again. It was closer this time. I shuddered involuntarily. We argued for a minute before Trevin stepped out onto the porch, phone up, recording. I hovered behind him just outside the threshold. The clouds above us churned like liquid slate, and from them something descended. It wasn't an ordinary funnel cloud. It was pinkish-gray, fibrous, and wet. It didn't twist or rotate so much as ripple, like muscle under skin. If I didn't know better, I would have said it looked like it was made out of actual flesh. Lightning flashed inside it, but instead of thunder, we heard something that made my stomach twist. Screaming. Dozens of voices, hundreds. Trevin's phone dropped from his hand. All around us, the air filled with a new sound. A dry, sharp rattle, like sand hitting metal, only it wasn't sand, it was teeth. Thousands of them, spinning like shrapnel, glinting in the porch light as they peppered the siding, ground, and railing. One yellow, human-sized specimen buried itself in the wood next to my hand. Trevin screamed, spinning around. His face was cut open, cheek split to the bone. More teeth jutted out from his shoulder and leg, with one lodged just above his eye socket. He staggered, slipped, and fell against the doorframe. I grabbed him and dragged him back inside. Teeth clinked off the walls as we slammed the door shut. Blood dripped in fat splats on the laminate floor. One of the embedded teeth twitched, then burrowed deeper into Trevin's thigh. He screamed again, slapping at it. Jared ran in with towels, white-faced and shaking. What's happening? The intercom buzzed once more, followed by the same calm voice. Severe wind event in progress. Do not exit structure. High likelihood of casualties. Shelter advised. I looked back at the post-it note. Do not turn me off, not even for a second. And for the first time, I intended to follow the instructions. Trevin spent the next 10 minutes convulsing on the floor while we tried to dig the teeth out of his leg with a butter knife and barbecue tongs. It wasn't just blood. The wounds wept something thicker, almost like tar. And the teeth, they weren't just stuck in him. They were working, writhing, as if chewing. Every time we gripped one, it squirmed beneath the skin, burrowing deeper into the flesh as if it knew. I'll never forget the one in his face. It had lodged above his eye in the soft meat under the brow. At first, Trevin was shouting, screaming. Then his voice pitched high and thin, and he just clawed at it. His fingernails broke as he frantically tried to dig it out. I pinned his arms. Jared hesitated, his face ghost pale and glistening with sweat, before jerking the tooth out with the tongs. Trevin's eyeball came with it, with a burst of fluid. I remember thinking it resembled egg whites. Trevin fainted and Jared dropped the tooth. It fell to the floor and twitched like a cockroach, then split in half and began to crumble. I wrapped Trevin's head in a kitchen towel and laid him out on the couch, while Jared dry heaved into the sink. Outside, the storm didn't fade. It circled and intensified. The lights flickered again. Wind hammered the walls with what sounded like sledgehammers made of flesh. And beneath it all, we could still hear the howling, the rising and falling, harmonizing with itself in a sick, a natural chorus. I peeked through the kitchen window, just a slit through the shutters. What I saw didn't make sense. The tornado had split, not just into multiple funnels, but into limb-like appendages, thick, muscular arms trailing fingers that dragged along the ground. They punched into the earth, re-emerged, and twisted like they were tasting the soil. One limb slammed into the grain silo half a mile away, causing it to explode in a bloom of rust and metal. "Is that thing alive?" Jared asked behind me. I didn't answer. I was staring at the intercom. It buzzed again with that same low tone, then the light on the panel turned red. "Alert! System integrity compromised. Shelter may not remain viable. Seek lowest point. Prepare for secondary events." "What the hell's a secondary event?" Jared asked. I didn't know, but I could feel it building, like a weight pressing through the ceiling. The wind wasn't lessening. If anything, it seemed to be seeking us out, and it knew we were inside. We barricaded the doors with whatever we could find, a couch, chairs, the mattress from upstairs. The intercom light blinked red the entire time. Trevin came to briefly, muttering something about the walls breathing. He passed out again seconds later. At one point, Jared asked, "Did we even book this place through a verified host?" It was a throwaway comment, but it stuck in my brain. After we got Trevin stable again, I pulled out my phone to see for myself if we still had no signal. To my dismay, we didn't, but the Verbo app still had an offline cache of our last correspondence. The listing was gone. It wasn't marked inactive or canceled. It had just vanished. Gone were the photos and our reservation record. It was as if we'd never even booked it. The only thing left was the owner's message thread. I clicked it. It said, "User not found. This account has been terminated." A little further down, it continued, "This property was removed due to false identity documentation and unverifiable ownership." My stomach turned. He wasn't even the owner. Jared looked up. What? Whoever listed this place? Verbo says he faked the ID. Then who the hell was he? Before I could answer, the intercom buzzed again. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a forecast. Precipitation incoming, anomalous hail detected, external temperatures dropping, seek reinforced shelter, estimated impact 6 minutes. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "Anomalous hail," I cried. "What does that even mean?" Jared asked. Tevin groaned from the couch, dried streaks of blood solidified on his cheek. We didn't wait. We grabbed him, still barely conscious, and carried him toward the crawlspace hatch in the hall closet. It was bolted shut with a steel bar and a crank lock, and it took us a minute to get it open. The air that wafted out was musty, cold, and damp. Below was a small, unfinished space with low ceilings, packed dirt, and old insulation falling in clumps between the joists. We dropped down just as the first impact struck the roof with a thunderous crash. Another and another quickly followed it, each of them loud enough to shake dust from the beams. Then came the smell. Sharp, chemical, and wrong. I angled my phone light up through the crack in the floorboards. Some sort of black fluid was melting through, bubbling on contact. Each drop left a small, fuming hole where it had landed, eating through the wood and metal like acid. I backed away fast. "It's burning through." Jared pointed toward the corner. "There's a sump pit or something under the house. Might be lower ground." We dragged Trevin that way, huddled behind an old tool cabinet, listening as the hail kept falling. Spiked balls of some frozen, unidentifiable compound, each one sizzling as it chewed its way through the roof. From above came a sound like a stovetop igniting. Whoomph! And something heavy collapsed. I stared at the intercom speaker on the floor joist. One had seemingly been built into every room. Containment failing, shelter breached, next phase imminent. "What the hell's that mean?" Jared screamed, no longer concealing his panic. I shushed him, expecting further instructions, but there were none, just the constant, maddening sound of dripping, banging and screaming coming from outside. Jared curled into himself. Why is this happening to us? What is this? I had no answers. All I had was Trevin's blood still tacky on my hands. I shook my head, defeated. We stayed huddled in the crawl space for hours. Time didn't seem to move right down there, either too fast or not at all. At some point, I realized I hadn't heard hail in a while. Just a low hiss above us, like corrosive steam, working its way through layers of timber and hardware. Trevin stirred once, muttering my name. His eye socket had stopped bleeding, but the skin around it had gone pale and waxy. Jared sat slumped beside him, arms tucked to his chest, rocking like he was trying to retreat into himself. I pulled my phone again. I still had no signal or notifications, and the saved listing was still absent. All that was left was the lingering verbo error. This account has been terminated. This time, when I clicked the host's profile, the app crashed completely. I sighed and held my breath, then lifted my head toward the joists. The intercom hadn't made a sound in hours, which almost made things worse. But just as I shifted to check on Trevin again, the speaker crackled back to life. Flash flood warning. Black flood approaching. Avoid contact. Exposure risk substantial. Substance is non-aqueous. Expect sudden emergence. Jared blinked. Flood? From where? It hasn't rained. And then, as if it had been waiting for us to doubt it, we heard the first gurgle, coming from beneath us, from the earth itself. In the back corner of the crawl space, where the sump pit dipped deepest, a thick, sluggish bubble emerged as if the dirt was melting. Something black and syrupy pressed upward through the soil, splitting the clay, oozing in our direction. I shouted for Jared, already grabbing Trevin under the arms. We hauled him backward across the floor as the pit filled. The stuff was thick and oily, and it was moving fast. It clung to the ground, then started creeping, stretching out in slow tendrils. Jared kicked one of the plastic crates into its path to slow its momentum, and it hissed on contact and melted to slag in seconds. Look out, you guys. It's not water, I said, as the substance rapidly approached my friends. It's not The goo touched Trevin's ankle. He spasmed as the fluid crawled up his leg like ivy in defiance of gravity, wrapping his calf and thigh and holding on tightly. We screamed and pulled him away from the ooze with all our might, but made little progress, the viscous fluid stretching in long ropes as we attempted to free him. Behind us, more of it seeped through the wall. The flood wasn't rising from one place, it was everywhere, sprouting from cracks in the dirt, swelling up from seams in the stone. It surrounded us with unnatural speed. We reached a half-rotted bench press frame left by a previous guest and climbed atop it. Keeping Trevin between us, Jared whimpered as the goo lapped at his shoes. And then the tendrils grew longer, some thinning into filaments that reached for us like antennae. One brushed Jared's arm, and he froze as if he'd just grabbed hold of a live wire. Jared! His body went rigid and his eyes widened. Foam bubbled at the edge of his lips. The goo slithered up his neck and over his jaw. He didn't scream or resist. Instead, involuntarily, he just breathed it in. A slow, wet gulp as the black fluid crawled into his nose, mouth, and ears. He fell backward, convulsing, arms flailing. The bench frame rattled. I tried to pull him back, but it was like trying to rescue someone drowning in tar. The goo opened over his face like a gaping maw and sealed. His features distorted beneath it, bubbling and twitching. Something deep inside him let out a sound I'll never forget, like a laugh submerged in boiling oil. Then he went still. His chest stopped rising. Even then, the substance wouldn't leave him be. It continued sinking into him, filling every orifice. Trevin moaned beside me, his one good eye focused on Jared's body. Is he? He asked, unexpectedly coherent. I couldn't answer, not really, but I nodded anyway. But just then, the intercom buzzed again. Casualty registered. Flood level, 67%. Realm breach imminent. Perimeter unstable. The hell's a realm breach? I whispered. The crawl space shuddered. Trevin clutched his stomach, groaning again. Something's wrong. I looked down. The black goo had touched the base of the frame. It was climbing again. I scanned the crawl space. We had nowhere else to go. The walls were leaking now, everything sweating the stuff. It wasn't so much as pouring in as being birthed. We needed a way out. Trevin, help me, I whispered. We've got to get higher. Trevin didn't move. Come on, I shouted, shaking him. We've got to go. We don't have much time. He just sat there staring at Jared's corpse. The black sludge had contorted his mouth into an O shape. His eyes were still open beneath the muck. I don't want to die like that, Trevin whispered. You're not going to, I shouted. But we have to move, now. We hoisted ourselves onto a rusted shelf bolted to the far wall, standing on bags of gravel and old drywall. It wasn't safer, but it was higher, a few extra inches of not dying. From below, the black flood surged. We pressed flat against the joist above and waited. The intercom's light turned red again. Next event imminent. Breach point forming. Biological threat inbound. Threat level, apex. Duration, indefinite. Then came the crackling noise, like glass under pressure, followed by the sound of something shattering. A thin ribbon of light cut through the gloom, shimmering just above the flood line. Then another, like slashes in reality. Trevin stared. Are those windows? No, I said definitively. They were tears, rips in the crawl space. Through them came movement. First a claw. No, not a claw. A leg. Chitinous and segmented, then another. Then a face with a long canine snout, but too thin and flexible, and black, bulbous eyes. The whole head was crowned with pincers. The thing pulled itself through one of the rips like it was climbing out of its own reflection. Behind it came another and another. Their bodies made no sound, but the flood responded, parting for them and lifting them up. They moved like sharks in deep water, and they were hunting. I grabbed Trevin's arm. He was silent now, locked up again. One of the creatures sniffed the air, clicking its mandibles. Then, like a puppet, its head snapped toward us with incredible speed, and it began swimming up the side of the crawl space. Trevin whimpered. I reached for the closest thing to a weapon I could find, a rusted wrench left on a nearby beam. When the thing reached us, I swung, striking it in the face. The beast recoiled, chittering, retreating down into the flood. A moment later, another latched onto Trevin's leg, clutching him tightly, and bit. He screamed. I'll never forget the way it sounded, so much worse than the screaming flesh cyclones beyond the rental walls. I swung again, smashing the thing's shell, but it didn't flinch. Unperturbed, it clamped its jaws down and dragged Trevin halfway off the ledge. No, 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 no! I screamed, lunging for Trevin in a last-ditch effort to save him. And that's when the wall exploded. A fresh funnel cloud blasted through the breach, this one thicker and faster, packed with spinning detritus. But the debris wasn't made up of bits of trees or shingles. They were teeth, millions of them, a literal wall of enamel and calcified roots, and they struck us like a wave. Trevin's body was lifted from the shelf and shredded, cutting off his shrieks of agony midair as he was mercilessly torn limb from limb, blood misting across the beams. I screamed, covering my face. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. A moment later, the intercom said emotionlessly, "All clear, storm event terminated. Thank you for your business." And I passed out. When I came to, the crawl space was bone dry, as if nothing had ever been there. There was no sign of the black sludge or gore, no scent, residue, or stains. Even the formerly wrapped floor joists had snapped back like memory foam. It was enough to make me feel as if I had somehow imagined the entire thing. But I knew I hadn't. My hands were sticky with someone's blood. Probably Trevin's. This had been no hallucination. I stumbled out of the sump pit through the kitchen and outside through what was left of the front door, half torn off and swinging on one hinge. The porch was gone, most of the roof had collapsed inward, and what remained of the metal siding looked like it had been melted with a blowtorch. Everything else in the house, including the furniture, walls, and a hot tub, had been either mangled or buried under debris. There were no tire tracks in the gravel, aside from our own, and no sign of emergency response. Not so much as a hint of ash or smoke. Everything was still. Or so I thought until I noticed the tree. About 30 yards out, an old oak stood leaning sideways in the wind. Something hung from it, tangled in the upper branches. Already, I knew what it was, but I walked there anyway. Trevin's skeleton was suspended in a loose net of fibers, maybe fishing line, perhaps something else. His bones had been picked clean, his jaw hung open. One of his arms was missing. What remains of his skull had a gouged-out, fractured orbit where his eye used to be. All across the ribs, hips, and arms were hundreds of tiny, bite-shaped divots. I couldn't scream. I no longer had it in me. Instead, I just dropped to my knees and stared. I stayed like that until dusk. No one came. No one ever came. Eventually, I mustered the energy to climb back into our truck and head back down the road until I got a bar or two of service. Then I called 911 and told them something. Not the truth, obviously, just that a freak tornado had hit us and that my friends were either missing or dead. Search and rescue found the ruins later that day. Trevin's body was never recovered. By the time responders arrived, the bones in the tree were gone, vanished as famously as the storm that arrived and taken his life. Jared's remains were never located. I reported the black sludge, the teeth, and the intercom warnings to the authority. They nodded and took notes, asked if I'd been drinking, which of course we had. A detective pulled me aside and insultingly asked how many tabs I'd dropped. When I insisted that an intercom-based weather reporting system had spoken to us directly, he asked if I'd ingested psilocybin. They never ordered toxicology reports. They didn't bother to catalog evidence or dig through the remains of the building. Never took samples of the walls or the floor, or the single twisted scrap of bone I found beneath what remained of the water heater. One officer asked if I was sure it wasn't a bone from an animal. Later, they found a single tooth buried at the base of the trunk and said it looked like a cow's. Eventually, they ruled it as an act of God, attributing the structural collapse to storm damage, and listed both of my friends' official causes of death as undetermined after several days of futile, half-hearted searches turned up nothing. The only evidence I had that either of my friends had even been there was the blood on my hands, but even that wasn't enough to convince anyone that something awful and far more bizarre than a tornado had ever happened. Unofficially, I was marked as a trauma case. A few people whispered about shock and hallucinations. The listing? Still wiped. Verbo claimed the host's account was removed for cause and offered me a $50 gift card and a tone-deaf message about customer safety being a top priority. I didn't sleep for weeks. Something more powerful gnawed at me. If what we experienced wasn't natural, if that house was more lure than shelter, then it couldn't have been the first time, and more importantly, would it be the last? I had my doubts. As such, my obsession with finding answers grew, and I began digging through old listings, deleted forums, and Reddit threads that had been flagged and removed. I found nothing directly, but I remembered the layout, the architecture, even the damn porch swing. I broadened my search, looking for Verbo listings that bore similarities. It took weeks, but I found it. A newly listed property in rural Arizona with no reviews. The photos showed a modern cabin. It appeared clean and inviting, with the desert sun spilling across the porch. It had the same wide metal shutters and polished kitchen, 2 bedrooms, an attic bunk. Even a storm intercom was visible in the background of one shot, with the same speaker grill beside the fridge. I zoomed in. A yellow post-it was stuck just above it. Don't turn me off. Not even for a second. The host's username, predictably, was just a string of numbers. There was no photo or bio, and the account was listed as having been recently verified. The property description welcomed travelers to enjoy the silence of the desert, far from civilization and perfect for storm season, and it was available that weekend. I sat there for a long time, motionless and unblinking, staring at the screen. If you looked at the shadows in the corners of those photos, where the walls met the floor, you could see the black crust, the remnants of yet another black flood. And the house? It wasn't rebuilt. It was the same one. I was sure of it. It had somehow been disassembled and relocated and was ready for someone new. I never went back to school after that. My football scholarship was quietly canceled within weeks of the news breaking. They said it was a paperwork issue, but nobody found it, not even me. The team coach sent a condolence text and then never followed up. No trace of Jared was ever found, not so much as a scrap of fabric or a puddle of blood. His parents posted flyers and opened a GoFundMe, but after 6 months, they stopped talking about it altogether. I don't blame them. Trevin had a closed-casket funeral. They buried his old jerseys and Letterman jacket, along with photos of him. I gave a eulogy I don't remember writing and stared at the ceiling of the church the whole time, half expecting it to shudder and split open. I still have nightmares to this day. Locally, the story goes that we were caught in a freak tornado and the structure we had been renting collapsed. The newspaper ran a one-paragraph blurb under the heading, "College students caught in a weekend storm, 2 dead, including star running back." No one interviewed me. No one asked what really happened. And even if they had, I doubt they would have believed me. In small-town Texas, the law doesn't work like it does in other places. If a death fits a box, they seal it and move on. And when it doesn't, they make it fit. Case closed. A few more months passed. I tried to move on, but something continued keeping me up. Every night in the stillness, I hear that voice again. Black flood approaching, avoid contact, exposure risk substantial. I tried to track down the Arizona Verbo listing again. That was gone now, too. Another dead end, though something told me that if I dug deeply enough, I'd eventually find listings from a town there where several people had recently gone missing, with it blamed on a freak storm. But I didn't want to find out what happened in Arizona. I wanted to anticipate where it would happen next, and so I kept looking. I imagined that if I found where it went, or where it had come from, I could prove it hadn't all been madness. That Trevin and Jared didn't die because we partied too hard, or ignored a storm alert, but because someone, or something, laid a trap for us in that house. And eventually, I'm proud to say, I found what I was looking for. Another new listing in yet another state, in Mexico this time, situated in remote desert flatland. Like the others, it had no reviews, and the property owner had no bio, and a badge saying they were recently verified. The structure was the same. It had an identical porch and sloping roofline, as well as the same front-facing windows and reinforced siding. They moved the entire house again, or built another one exactly like it. I had no idea how they managed such a thing. Long ago, I had suspected the paranormal, but that didn't matter. Not anymore. I was certain this was it. My opportunity to make everything right again. In one of the photos behind the kitchen counter, you can barely see the weather warning intercom, but it's there. And just below it, there's the all-too-familiar yellow post-it note with the telltale message, "Don't turn me off, not even for a second." I stared at the listing for hours. Then I booked it. Next weekend, for 3 nights. This time I'm going alone to find out what it truly is, and to make sure no one else ever walks through that door again. I'm going so that Trevin and Jared's deaths aren't in vain, and I'm burning it to the ground once and for all. It should have killed me when it had the chance. If I don't come back, just know the storm's not over. And if it continues, it'll be over my dead body. That was Tornado Warning by Edwin Crane, as performed by yours truly. A storm like that doesn't blow over, it chews through. And poor Mark, he didn't just find shelter, he found a mouth waiting to close.
Never trust a building that seems too still during a tornado, especially one with sealed doors and talking static.
Starting with our next tale, we're proud to present 4 stories brought to you in collaboration with Velux Books, a small press with a monstrous appetite for horror. With over a decade of independent publishing behind them, Velux specializes in chilling collections, weird fiction, and offbeat nightmares. Many of tonight's authors, including Jack Finn, Ross Taylor, Jason Fisher, and Michael Squid, are part of their growing roster. If you like what you hear tonight, visit veluxbooks.com to discover more tales that will keep you up at night. Our next story from Jack Finn takes us back, deep into the frozen heart of World War II. A stranded soldier, a savage secret, and a pack that doesn't howl at the moon because they don't need to.
This one's for those who think monsters always come from the outside. Let's find out what waits in the cold. This is Among the Wolves by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. Pyotr Kowalczyk lived by a simple mantra: sweep and live. He was an old man, nearly 65, in July 1943 when the Nazis had rounded up all 235 people in his small village of Michnov and executed all but the 24 or so who they sent to the camps. The Waffen SS soldiers had burned every structure in the Michnov and buried the bodies in the trenches the local partisan units and Polish Home Army groups had dug for defense. Pyotr did not know why the Germans spared him and executed the rest of his family, his 2 sons, his sweet grandchildren, and his beautiful Anya. Perhaps the Germans thought him too old to waste a bullet on, or he supposed they wanted a few cowed survivors to warn others of what happened to those who opposed the Third Reich. Regardless, he was sent to Special Camp 137 to be an orderly for the camp commandant, Major Horst Vetter. Pyotr swept Vetter's 2-room office as an orderly, polished his boots, and occasionally made his coffee, a task that Pyotr was amazed the arrogant SS officer would allow a prisoner to do. How easy it would be for Pyotr to poison the coffee and get some justice for his Anya and all of Michnov. While sweeping the office one day, Pyotr had found a small bowl of rat poison and slipped it into the lining of his gray prisoner's shirt. At night, he fantasized about dissolving the little white ball in Vetter's coffee and watching the Nazi turn blue as he clawed at his uniform collar with its precious SS lightning bolts, gasping for air like a fish out of water. But Pyotr could never muster the courage to do it. One day, Pyotr would always think to himself, one day, Anya, I will avenge you. Pyotr and the other 3 camp orderlies slept in separate quarters from the other prisoners in Special Camp 137, mainly because Vetter and Dr. Grabner, who ran the medical research facility, did not want the orderlies contaminating their workspaces with the lice that infested the malnourished residents in the prison barracks. A special cell with 4 bunk beds was attached to Dr. Grabner's medical research building. The cell was at the end of the hall of a long corridor of cells that housed the objects of Dr. Grabner's research. Pyotr was always careful not to look at the occupants of the cells as he passed by, the living mutilations of Dr. Grabner's research. At night, Pyotr and the other orderlies would try to block out those poor souls' screams and whimpering cries. The other 3 orderlies, all Slovaks, worked in the medical research building next to Vetter's 2-room headquarters. Vetter had selected Pyotr as his orderly because, Unlike the three Slovaks, Piotr had blue eyes, and Vetter found dark eyes distasteful to look upon. Piotr was sweeping the outer office the night Sergeant Metz brought the stranger in. Metz was precisely the kind of man the Nazis liked to attract into their ranks. He was a burly, blue-eyed brute, with a blonde crew cut and an unfathomable penchant for cruelty and violence. Piotr had often seen Metz mercilessly beating prisoners for even the slightest infractions. The look of feral glee that filled the sergeant's face as he doled out pain and suffering to the unfortunate souls of Special Camp 137 haunted Piotr's dreams. Once, Piotr heard guards joking that they could always tell a prisoner who had met Metz because they were missing teeth, the result of Metz's trademark kick in the teeth while a prisoner was down on the ground. When Metz walked into the outer office, Piotr was careful to look down and avert his eyes, but he could still see the jack-booted Nazi kick the mud off his feet onto the floor. "Clean this up," Metz sneered at Piotr as the two German guards with him chuckled. Piotr nodded wordlessly and quickly began sweeping the dirt from the wood floor as Metz walked by him. He could see a fourth man with the Germans, a tall man in a dark suit with black hair and a thin mustache. Something about the man seemed very familiar to Piotr. "Where have I seen that face before?" thought Piotr, as Metz instructed the man to wait against the wall as the two guards took up a position by the door. Metz knocked on Major Vetter's office door and then quickly slipped in and shut it behind him when the commandant had given permission to enter. The dark-haired man seemed to be studying Piotr closely as he swept up the mud and deposited it in a metal pail. The man's intense scrutiny made Piotr very uncomfortable. However, something about the man seemed familiar, and Piotr could not help but keep glancing at him. To Piotr's horror, the man walked across the room and up to him. Something in the man's gait tickled a memory in Piotr's mind. Piotr nervously looked over at the two guards who, curiously staring straight ahead, did not notice the man's movement. "Do we know each other?" asked the man in perfectly accented Polish. "I do not think so, sir." Piotr looked down at his feet. He was not supposed to talk to anyone but other prisoners, and never in his native tongue at any moment. Piotr expected the guards to walk over and begin beating him. "Here now, good man, let me look at you." "Sir, please, you will get me in trouble," Piotr pleaded with the stranger in a hushed tone. "Nonsense. Let me see you." Piotr looked up, and the man seemed to study his face with his dark, piercing eyes. The man brought his hand to his chin and made a much exaggerated thinking gesture as he looked at Piotr. The orderly's eyes nervously darted to the guards, who seemed oblivious to the exchange. The man squinted and pointed at Piotr. "It will come to me. I am certain we have met before. In the meantime, can I ask you a favor, my good man?" "A favor?" Piotr's unease was growing steadily. "I would like to leave something with you. Could I do that?" "What is it?" Piotr's eyes continually darted to the guards to see if they noticed the conversation. The man reached into the pocket of his dark suit and produced a gleaming silver dog whistle attached to a silver chain. Writing, in a language that Piotr did not recognize, covered the whistle. As the man reached out and handed the whistle to Piotr, a shock of recognition ran through the old Polish man's body. "It couldn't be," thought Piotr. "It just couldn't be. And why is he speaking with a Polish accent now?" The man placed the whistle in Piotr's hand and closed his fingers around it. Piotr stared into the man's face, a face he had not seen in a very long time, unable to speak. "Now, if you hear a dog, I need you to blow that whistle. Can you do that?" Piotr just nodded. Good. You won't forget now, will you?" Piotr shook his head. A big smile crossed the man's familiar face, and he walked across the room to where Metz had told him to wait. Piotr looked over at the guards, who continued to look straight ahead uncaringly as he slipped the dog whistle into his pocket. Major Vetter looked up from his desk at Sergeant Metz with disdain. "Can you repeat what you just said, Sergeant?" Vetter ensured he spoke in a tone that let the brutish sergeant know that it was a command, not a request. "An Englishman came to the camp gate this evening requesting to speak with you, sir. He said it was a matter of great importance." Metz stared at his commanding officer with dull, slack eyes. "And you checked this man for weapons?" "Yes, sir. 2 times, very thoroughly. He had no weapons." "Where did he come from?" "He did not say, sir, but he must be a spy. Should I have him shot?" Metz failed to hide the hint of eagerness in his voice. "Idiot! What kind of spy walks up to a gate and knocks?" Vetter shook his head, increasingly irritated by the sergeant's ignorance. "Bring him in." "Yes, sir." The sergeant snapped to attention and then exited the room. Major Vetter knew that the Third Reich needed men like Sergeant Metz, and he had to admit he was very effective at keeping the prisoners in line. But he was so limited when it came to thinking. Before the war, Horst Vetter had been an engineer and enjoyed creating order by solving complex problems and making things fit. That was one of the reasons he had joined the Waffen-SS, the armed wing of the Saalschutz, or SS. The SS had solutions to problems. The SS created order. As Commandant of Special Camp 137, he had secured a senior position in the SS Totenkopfverband, the SSTV, or Death's Head units. He played a leading role in solving the problems of Germany once and for all. Dealing with mindless brutes like Sergeant Metz was just a cost of doing business. Metz was just a cog in the machine that ground down the problems of the Third Reich into ash and dust. Sergeant Metz returned to the room with a tall man in a dark suit. Vetter quietly studied the man with his ice-blue eyes, a look he knew made the prisoners cower with fear. He enjoyed watching the wretched creatures wither under his gaze. Major Vetter saw the Aryan race as a bright sun that scorched the undesirable weeds of humanity wherever they tried to grow among the flowers of Germany insidiously. To Vetter's surprise, not only did the man return his gaze with dark, piercing eyes, but the man smiled. Not a cursory cordial smile, a genuine, natural smile that reached up to the man's eyes. "Major Vetter, I presume?" The man in English cheerfully extended his hand in greeting. "I fear you have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I do not know yours." Vetter stared coldly, not shaking the man's hand. "Oh, yes, of course. Do you mind?" The man gestured to the wooden chair on the other side of the SS Major's desk. "By all means." Vetter nodded, but something about this Englishman's nonchalance was beginning to bother him. The man sat down on the wooden chair, unbuttoned the front of his suit to make himself more comfortable, and looked around the room. Maybe this man is some kind of spy, thought Vetter, agitated at the uncertainty. "Well, look at that." The man leaned over to look out the office's window. "You even have a view of the night sky. What a beautiful full moon it is tonight, too." "I believe you were about to tell me your name." Vetter's tone made it clear that he was not amused. He had seen even seasoned combat soldiers pale when he took this tone of voice with them, but this man seemed unperturbed. "Yes, of course. My name is Jonas Greystone," the man replied, as if he'd shown up for afternoon tea. "You should wipe that smug look off your face, Englander." Metz hovered menacingly over Greystone. Major Vetter raised a hand and cut off Metz with an annoyed look. "You are aware that England and Germany are at war, are you not?" "Oh, of course. Dreadful business." Greystone shook his head and furrowed his brow. "So, you will understand our curiosity at an Englishman showing up on our doorstep in the middle of the night." "While I do speak English, that does not make me an Englishman," corrected Greystone. "He's clearly an Englishman and a spy," started Metz, but was silenced by a stern look from Major Vetter. "Wer ich Deutsch sprechen werde, wäre ich Deutscher?" "If I spoke German, would I be German?" Greystone said in perfectly accented German. "If you come here seeking to play games, Mr. Greystone, I think you will find I am no mood for folly." Vetter leaned forward, his eyes cold and serpentine as he lost his patience. On the contrary, Major, I am here to take a problem off your hands. Greystone crossed his right leg over his left to make himself more comfortable. Mr. Greystone, Vetter's lip curled upwards in a half-sneer, nobody takes anything from the Third Reich. The Reich takes what it wants from those that do not deserve what they have. Major Vetter punctuated his words by moving his hand to his collar and rubbing his thumb over the SS's death's head insignia on his collar. As he watched his commanding officer losing patience with the Englishman, Sergeant Metz let a wolfish grin cross his face. The Nazi sergeant sensed violence was about to unfold and would revel in the chance to break this Englishman. Let me clarify. Greystone raised his hand with his index finger extended to make a point as he spoke. You have someone residing at your camp. 3 someones, actually, that I believe would be mutually beneficial if you turn them over to me. Major Vetter laughed mirthlessly, and Sergeant Metz followed the officer's lead with a grunting laugh that sounded more like a boar searching for a forest truffle. Mr. Greystone, it is improbable that you will be leaving this camp, let alone taking anyone from it. Major Vetter's voice was thick with malice. I am speaking of 3 brothers, the Kovac brothers, identical triplets, though one has a scar on his right eye, continued Greystone, unperturbed by Vetter's threats and moving his index finger across his right eye from brow to cheek to demonstrate the man's scar. Sergeant Metz screwed his face into a look of puzzlement. Dr. Grabner has 3 Serb twins in the research building. Triplets, corrected Greystone. I have grown tired of this game, Vetter laced his words with irritation. Sergeant Metz, take our guest for questioning. I want to know where he is from and how he got here. Mr. Greystone, I think you will find Special Camp 137 far less hospitable than wherever you came from. I can assure you, Major Vetter, that by tomorrow morning, your career in the SS will come to an unceremonious end if I do not leave here with the Kovac brothers this evening, Greystone answered coolly. Sergeant Metz appeared ready to throttle the Englishman, but Major Vetter stayed his hand. He studied the unusual man before him. Greystone was as calm as he had ever seen any man. Not even a bead of perspiration dotted his forehead, despite Vetter having just assured him of certain torture and death. While in Berlin, he had heard rumors of the Gestapo training men to pass as Englishmen or Americans for special operations. Could this Greystone be a Gestapo agent? He had shown no credentials, but what other explanation for this bizarre visitor could there be? Greystone had spoken both English and German with equally impeccable accents. Sergeant Metz, go find Dr. Grabner, ordered the SS Major. Sir? Metz appeared confused by the sudden change in orders. Go ask Dr. Grabner to join me. I want to hear what is so special about these Serbs. The sergeant snapped to attention and left the room. Greystone sat wordlessly, barely even paying attention to Major Vetter. He seemed more interested in craning his neck to peer up at the night sky. Who sent you? Vetter hated the sound of uncertainty in his voice. I assure you, Major, I have come of my own accord. Greystone gave a casual smile that Vetter found increasingly maddening. The man must be Gestapo. Vetter's thoughts turned ominous. Probably someone high up in Himmler's circle to be this confident. Major Vetter found himself racked with indecision. If this man was indeed a secret agent of the Gestapo, harming or hindering him in any way would be career suicide. It could even result in an assignment to the Eastern Front. But on the other hand, this was precisely the kind of ruse the English and their allies were capable of. If he let an English spy walk out of his camp with 3 important prisoners, he would surely face the firing squad. He needed to hear what Dr. Grabner had to say about the Serbs. Greystone reached into his jacket and checked a pocket watch. Vetter watched as the dark-haired man frowned down at the timepiece and returned it to his coat. Do you have somewhere to be? Vetter was starting to feel unnerved by this whole encounter. No, Greystone sighed, but time is always of the essence. Sergeant Metz returned to the room with a thin, bald man with small round spectacles and dressed in a white doctor's lab jacket with a swastika emblazoned on the left breast pocket. Vetter noticed the jacket had tiny pencil-tip-sized speckles of dried blood stains on it. "Sergeant, that will be all. You can wait in the outer office," commanded Vetter before gazing at the doctor. "Heinrich, thank you for coming." The burly sergeant saluted Major Vetter sharply with the stiff, raised-arm Nazi salute and turned sharply on his boot heels, exiting the room and closing the door behind him. Heinrich Grabner was a senior Nazi Party official and member of the Allgemeine SS, the branch of the SS responsible for enforcing the Third Reich's racial policies. His work at the camp consisted mainly of experiments on the prisoners to identify other genetic traits of undesirables and further highly classified research. Although Vetter was in charge of Special Camp 137, he primarily managed the camp's prisoners and maintained security. Grabner was senior to him within the Nazi Party, and his medical research was the camp's priority. However, this did not cause friction between the two men, as they shared mutual respect based on the same ideological beliefs and religious devotion to the Third Reich. "Sergeant Metz told me this is about the Kovac triplets." The bald doctor grabbed a chair and seated himself at the edge of the desk, eyeing Greystone suspiciously. "Yes, it is." Vetter showed his annoyance at Metz for discussing the matter with the doctor and made a mental note to discipline the sergeant later. "I would like the boys turned over to me." Dr. Grabner raised his eyebrows, surprised at the unusual guest in his forthright request. "And you are?" "Jonas Greystone." He gave a slight nod of greeting. "He is here to take the Serbs. What are your thoughts on that?" asked Vetter. The doctor looked at Vetter for several seconds with serious, studious eyes. Vetter knew the doctor was coming to the same conclusions as him. Such a request only came from the Gestapo's secret police. "The Kovac boys, teens really, are interesting specimens. They were captured in Serbia in the vicinity of a town called Zaroza. They are strong for their size and have a high tolerance to pain." "Pain? I trust they have not been hurt." Greystone narrowed his eyes at the doctor. "No, they have not been hurt, though they may have found some of my experiments and tests uncomfortable." "What have your tests discovered?" Vetter leaned back and folded his arms across his chest. "All three boys are uniformly strong. My guards must take special precautions when moving them. When they first got to the camp, we had several severe injuries due to them breaking loose from their bonds and attacking my staff. Their pain threshold is remarkable. When I conducted these same tests on other patients, I broke their will to resist in minutes. But these boys did not twitch. It's remarkable." "Who has seen your reports, Doctor?" Vetter gave the man a withering look. "My work gets reported to the most senior members of the Allgemeine SS. It's my understanding that my reports are received with great interest." A look of smug arrogance crossed his face. This was all beginning to make sense to Vetter. Senior members of the Third Reich would be very interested in genetics that made a soldier stronger and more pain-resistant. Vetter suspected Himmler was aware of Dr. Grabner's findings, perhaps even the Führer. "Though their dietary habits are still a mystery," added the doctor. "Dietary habits?" asked Vetter, raising one eyebrow. "Yes, at the time of their capture, the Kovac boys were eating the corpse of some of our recently killed soldiers. As a matter of fact, they appear unable to digest any food aside from fresh meat. They regurgitate anything else we have fed them." Gunfire suddenly punctuated the quiet night, followed by shouts and screams. Major Vetter leaped up from his desk, his hand going to the pistol holstered on his hip. A look of concern crossed the Nazi doctor's face. They were deep within Reich-held territory. This was supposed to be a safe and secure area where he could conduct his research. "Sergeant Metz, what's going on?" shouted Vetter. "Gentlemen, I am afraid I warned you that time was of the essence." Greystone shook his head, his face a mask of disappointment. "Sergeant Metz, what's going on?" called the major from behind the closed door. The sounds of automatic gunfire and screams were escalating outside. When he recognized the tall, dark-haired man, Pyotr knew something would happen tonight. A smile crossed Pyotr's lips, perhaps the first he had smiled since that July morning in 1943. The two German guards lay sprawled on the floor and motionless, their empty coffee cups broken and shattered alongside their bodies. Sergeant Metz, the monster in the nightmares of so many prisoners in Special Camp 137, lay on the floor, his legs kicking wildly as he clawed at his neck for air. Rivulets of blood seeped out of the scratches he tore into the skin of his neck as he gasped for air. Pyotr walked over to the struggling sergeant, stepping over the spilled remains of the poisoned coffee. He looked down and noticed with satisfaction that the brute had urinated on himself, soaking the front of his uniform pants as he struggled to breathe. The man looked up at Pyotr, his blue eyes bulging and bloodshot, his face blued with the lack of oxygen from the poison attacking his respiratory system. Pyotr smiled down at the sergeant and kicked the flailing sergeant in the mouth with all his might, sending a spray of blood and broken teeth across the floor. He watched the man's kicks slowly lessen to a light flutter, wrinkling his nose in disgust as the sergeant's bowels vacated themselves. "This is for you, Anya," thought Pyotr with a smile as he stared down into the Nazi beast's lifeless eyes. Outside, all chaos was breaking out, and he could see flashes of automatic rifle fire lighting the night. Though Pyotr thought he detected more screaming and less gunfire than he had moments before. Then, over the maelstrom unfolding outside, he heard a dog's clear and distinct howl. The man reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver whistle. Putting it to his lips, Pyotr began to blow. "What is this, Greystone? What have you done?" demanded Vetter, drawing his Luger pistol and pointing it at Greystone. "I have done nothing." Greystone sat back calmly in the chair. "This was all within your power to avoid, Major." "Metz? Where the hell is Sergeant Metz?" "Hell is probably an excellent guess." Greystone let a sardonic smile slip across his face. "I'll go get him," offered Dr. Grabner, running to the office door. Just as Dr. Grabner turned the doorknob and swung the door open, a huge, brown, wolf-like beast leaped through the door and onto the Nazi doctor. Major Vetter watched in horror as the beast dug its claws into the doctor's chest and clamped its large jaws down on the doctor's screaming face. It was the most enormous wolf Vetter had ever seen, at least twice the size of any of its species, with a coat of thick, gray-brown fur. The creature's teeth were easily the size of a man's index finger. Dr. Grabner's muffled screams snapped Major Vetter out of his momentary shock, and he pointed his Luger at the beast and fired several shots into its side. The creature swung its massive head to look at Vetter with eyes as dark as coal, taking the vast majority of Grabner's face with it. Lidless eyes bulged out of Grabner's skinless face. A gaping hole remained where the doctor's nose had been, and a lipless mouth screamed inhumanely as the doctor's limbs flailed in mindless agony. The wolf snarled at Vetter. Pieces of Grabner's face dangled from the creature's razor-sharp teeth like curtains of fluttering meat. The wolf seemed unfazed by the bullet wounds and rounded on Vetter. Malice filled the creature's dark, burning eyes, and Vetter noticed the beast had a scar running down the right eye from brow to cheek. He backed away, trying to put his desk between him and the beast. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Greystone sitting as calmly in his chair as he was just moments before. A second wolf, of equal size to the first, padded into the room and, as casually as someone would sniff a flower, sank its teeth into Dr. Grabner's writhing body and tore free a mouthful of flesh and stringy intestines, prompting an inhuman scream to burst forth from the Nazi doctor's ravaged mouth. "You did this!" The Major turned his weapon on the smiling Greystone. Vetter pulled the trigger, and the gun let out a loud click. Empty. Greystone smiled that remarkably calm smile at him and shrugged. Then the beast was upon the SS Major, slamming him to the ground. Blood gushed from his neck, coating the death's head insignia on his collar as the wolf tore into Vetter's neck. His screams became choked gurgles as the beast tore through muscle and sinew. Pyotr watched as the giant wolf waited in the doorway for the other two members of its pack. Shortly after he blew the whistle, the first of the enormous wolves had run past him and leaped into Major Vetter's office through the open door. A second wolf followed shortly after the first. The beast that sat patiently in the doorway looked at Pyotr but showed no malice toward him. Pyotr decided he would keep his distance nonetheless. The sounds of fighting outside had died, and Pyotr no longer heard gunshots. The two gore-covered wolves appeared from Vetter's office and calmly trotted by Pyotr without so much as a sidelong glance. They joined their companion waiting by the door, and all three walked calmly outside and into the night. Pyotr leaned his head into the office and saw the faceless, disemboweled body of Dr. Grabner lying torn and mangled on the floor, and he smiled. In his mind, Pyotr pictured all the townspeople of Michnov, celebrating around a massive bonfire in the afterlife. His sons and grandchildren would be there, running happily around the fire, and of course, his beautiful Anya would be there, with the firelight reflected in her eyes. "I think I will be seeing you again very soon, my beautiful Anya," thought Pyotr with a wan smile. To his surprise, the tall, dark-haired man appeared in the doorway of Major Vetter's office and smoothed out the wrinkles of his jacket with a calm hand. He looked up, surveyed the dead Nazi guards, rested his eyes on Pyotr, and smiled. Pyotr stepped forward and handed the silver whistle back to the man. "Good job," said Greystone in perfect Polish, raising the whistle and putting it in his pocket. "Excellent job indeed." I know you," stammered Pyotr, failing to keep the nervousness from his voice. "Oh?" Greystone cocked his head, interested. "When I was a little boy, my grandfather took me to Prague. We went to a carnival to see the animal shows when we were there. It was called the World's Most Wondrous Traveling Carnival. You were there. You were the ringmaster. You walked over to me, leaned down, and gave me a balloon the same way you handed me the whistle earlier. That's when I recognized you. That's how I knew it was you. The movements were identical. The Germans called you Greystone, but you went by a different name then." "You have an excellent memory. I have gone by many names," Greystone smiled. Pyotr, isn't it?" "Yes, that's me, but how? That was over 65 years ago. You look exactly the same." Greystone just smiled and shrugged. "I am a collector of oddities. Some would even say I am an oddity myself." He patted Pyotr on the shoulder and started to walk out the door toward the wolves, then stopped and turned back toward Pyotr. "Did you like it?" "Like what?" The question caught Pyotr off guard. "The show, when your grandfather took you to see the carnival. Did you like it?" "It was the most amazing thing I have ever seen," Pyotr smiled, remembering that wondrous day so long ago. "Pyotr," Greystone had a curious look on his face, "would you like to come with us?" "Yes, I would like that very much." Pyotr gave the man a broad smile that made him look almost childlike. "Anya, it looks like we will have to wait a little longer to see each other again," thought Pyotr, as he walked alongside the ringmaster and the three wolves out into the darkness of the night. That was Among the Wolves by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. I've seen bad winters, but that's not frostbite. That's fate bite.
You know it's bad when the wolves look at you and lower their heads.
If that tale chilled your bones, you'll find plenty more like it at veloxbooks.com. Check out Jack Finn and other terrifying storytellers from the Velox family, because winter isn't the only thing that bites.
Up next, we head to the stars, or what's left of them, In this haunting tale from Ross Tyson, a team explores the remains of an abandoned lunar base, but some echoes don't stop reverberating. This is Fly Me to the Moon by Ross Tyson. Man's been on this earth millions of years, exploring the planet, building civilizations, killing and creating in an endless cycle. Man first went into space starting almost 80 years ago. Think about it. We spend all this time getting around our own planet, arguing over the smallest bits of land, but when we finally set our mind to space travel, it only took us a few decades to get where we wanted to go. I'm proud to say my grandmother was one of those that helped to get us there. She started out back in 1959, fresh out of college, as an intern for NASA. The space race was already going strong, the US versus the Soviets, and she managed to get right in the middle. Graham stayed there for 40 more years, only retiring right before Y2K. She's up there in years now, and I wanted to try to do something to preserve the memories she had of that time, so I began to collect her stories. We started out with the basics, talking about how she joined, what she did, the history surrounding everything when she was there, all the things you learn in a high school history class. When we started discussing the missions she worked on, though, that's when I realized that there was a lot of history missing. Locked up, never to be heard or read by anyone, nor should it. There's a reason space exploration has slowed down. There are missions that were made off the books and off record, launched from secret black sites around the world. Graham both saw and heard terrors beyond our comprehension from the dark void of space. She shared those stories with me, these secrets kept from us by those in power. The human price of our curiosity is much higher than we were led to believe. These people deserve to have their stories known. I'm enclosing one of her stories here. She can get a bit long-winded, as do some in their old age, so I've tried to edit it down, anything that isn't relevant. I'm still going through everything with her as well. With her age, she can't stay focused for very long, so we're doing these little interviews in hour sessions every day. I'll transcribe and upload what I can when I can. What follows is a transcript of what Graham told me on April 4, 2020. Any interjections of my own will be formatted with brackets around them. My name's Evelyn Laura Smart. I was a mission control contact with NASA from 1959 until 1999. I was the one that any astronauts or crew would speak to, the voice on the ground. I relayed this information back to whoever needed it in flight control, navigation, and engineering and such. I didn't set out to work there, it just sort of fell into my lap. I'd worked as a switchboard operator, mostly taking emergency calls for the local departments. NASA was doing some recruiting and one of my supervisors recommended me. Then, before I knew it, there I was, sitting in the big mission control room, watching the big screen with the video feed and talking to our very own spacemen. Here she goes into a tangent about how lovely Armstrong and Aldrin are, with many mentions about Christmas cards from the latter. So, one of the first missions I was there for was the first picture of Earth from orbit. Obviously, being in communication, it wasn't really necessary, but we all crowded into the control room to see the picture as soon as it was transmitted. Granted, it was the late 50s, so we were waiting for quite a while. We expected cheers when it finally came through. It started that way, at least. Then everything quickly died down. There was the Earth, the huge curve with a beautiful crown of light from the sun shining around it. We captured something else, though, something that I fear I'll see again one day. Behind the Earth, off in the distance, was something. Giant. It wasn't completely clear, but what you could make out was a clearly defined torso, arms outstretched with wicked spines jutting from the outside. Large red eyes blazed against the dark void behind the figure, with the gaping maw underneath opened in a terrifying roar. The scale of this thing was huge. No way it couldn't be seen from a normal telescope here on Earth. We aimed our most powerful scope at the coordinates we estimated it to be at and swept the sky but couldn't see it anywhere. Took another picture from the satellite and it was gone, as if it had never been there. To this day, we don't know what the hell it was. We check for it in every photo we take, every sweep of the sky, and it's only shown up 2 more times since then. Once in 1979 and once in 1999. I don't know many people in the agency now, so God knows if it's been there again. Every time it showed up, though, it appeared larger. Here she goes on about a few other notable advances in tech, most irrelevant to what we're discussing now. What a lot of people don't realize is that there were manned space flights before the ones in the history books. Sure, there's always been the theories about lost cosmonauts and such from the Soviets, and there are definitely 2 cases of that, but we had our share as well. There was an initial manned spaceflight in 1960, the Daedalus. She noticed a look of shock on my face, apparently, and laughed. Never read about that one, eh? It was kept tightly under wraps. We didn't want anyone to know about it until we had them back on the ground successfully. Otherwise, it may kill morale around the office. No, we kept a small crew, launched the rocket off from an isolated area of Alaska. We did a lot of launches from there, kept the Reds on their toes back in the day. Anyway, this was a 3-man crew. There was Bill Zask, James Hanlon, and Terry Duncan. Those 3 were a tight crew. They were supposed to go up, orbit for 12 hours, and come back down. We would pass it off as a comet if anyone saw, but never got that chance. Things went south fast. They took off, all was fine, until they hit the upper atmosphere. They tried to ease back on the jets, make sure they made it into orbit and didn't overshoot. Everything went to hell. Jets wouldn't cut off. We don't know what caused the malfunction. I heard them shouting, trying to fix the issue, and it didn't happen. They flew straight through, getting just enough adjustment from the orbital pull to be shot off course and toward the direction of the sun. She lets out a sigh here, shaking her head. Jets continued firing, taking them even further out. We maintained radio contact with them for 20 hours after takeoff. I spoke with them as fuel ran out. They began drifting into the void, no hope of returning, never to feel solid ground again. To this day, I don't know if it was something they really saw or the insanity getting to them as they died and faced their mortality. James was the first to begin raving, telling us about the bodies floating by the cockpit windows. I tried to clarify what he meant, assuming celestial bodies. I'll never forget the response from Bill. "No, Evelyn," he said to me. "Human bodies. Dozens of them." They described the field of bodies, male and female, old and young, all naked as the day they were born. Bill swore that one smiled at him as he went by. We didn't have live feed cameras at the time, unfortunately, so we weren't able to confirm. The way they described it, though, I have no doubt they were seeing all of this. A lot of transmissions got lost in static, limits of the tech at the time. The last broadcast we received was Bill. He was raving, still talking about the bodies. Said they were talking to him now, telling him he could live forever with them. He said he was going to open the emergency hatch. Maybe it was my emotions getting the better of me. Right before he opened it and the static took over, I swear there was another voice. She drifts off and stares out the window next to her. The sun went down an hour ago. Stars were plainly visible, shining in the inky darkness. I asked what the voice said. It's ingrained in my head. I can hear it clear as that moment 60 years ago. Come, be with us. Become as stars and drift immortal. Graham's tired, says she's going to bed. End transcription. Graham is in one hell of a mood today. Not sure if she's just feeling better than usual or something's got her riled up. Either way, she's letting her feelings be known. That's just a forewarning before we get into this transcription. There are things about her in here that I personally never wanted to hear. No, really. She can tell me how she saw eldritch beings in the vastness of space, and none of that is as terrifying as her talking about hooking up with astronauts in the training areas. Ugh. Here's the transcription. I'm gonna go chug bleach. Conversation from April 5th, 2020. Again, this is being told by Graham and translated by me. My own interjections are in these brackets. Oh, you want to hear more? All right, guess it's time to turn this nonsense off. Lived through the damn missile crisis, and I'm going to get taken out because nobody is competent enough to stay in their damn houses. Graham's been cursing like a sailor all day. She only does this when she's either very happy or very anxious. And so, let's see. I told you we had some crews up there already, yeah? Just couldn't get any successful returns down. Damn Reds beat us to that. The joke was on them, though. They just tossed Gagarin up there in a metal tube and waited for him to come back down on his own. We actually had our own man pilot themselves back down to her. How's that for you? Russians don't have anything on American determination. So we did a few other missions once we finally got the hang of putting people up there and bringing them back down. It was all smooth sailing for the most part. So now, what did we decide to do? Put a man on the goddamn moon. She gets up and goes to the kitchen, returning with a bottle of red wine and a comically large glass. I mentioned to her that it's only around 2 in the afternoon. I worked with astronauts, darling. Days don't matter when you're orbiting the planet. Anyway, it was 62 that we crashed a vessel on the far side of the moon. That was something of a test run, I suppose, seeing just how bad we could crash and burn something before we tried it again with people inside. We had the Ranger 4 vessel that we sent up there. Had it do a flyby of the moon for a bit, then take some photos before dive bombing it to the surface and taking some pictures for us there. We never released those to the public. Scared the hell out of all of us in the command center when they transmitted back. Keep in mind all the pictures we had at the time were black and white. Still, no color photography on that scale yet. So Ranger 4 lands there and immediately begins snapping pictures. All of us are standing around expecting to see just a barren expanse of gray rock. Nothing all too special. Lo and behold, the first picture comes back and there's someone just standing there, right in front of the crashed capsule. We couldn't tell gender or race or anything. They were in a spacesuit that looked remarkably like the ones we were developing. So naturally we think, oh no, they beat us to the moon. Because who else could it be at this point? The Russians were the only other country keeping any kind of pace with us. Then we realized it couldn't be them. They would have already been rubbing it in our faces if they had landed a man on the moon. There's no way this is from anyone on our planet. That's when the rest of the pictures started coming in. The suit kept getting closer and closer to the capsule, maintaining the same distance the whole time. It just kind of floated over it. Then you could see into the visor on the helmet. There, where there should have been someone's face visible, there was just fire. Pure, bright flame. Then the pictures stopped. Nothing else came from Ranger 4. She finishes off her first glass of wine, or half-gallon. Hard to tell from the size of the glass. She immediately empties the rest of the bottle into it. I'll give the higher-ups at NASA credit, though. Crazy bastards didn't let seeing a flaming cosmonaut stop them from going ahead with their plans. We plugged away at it, sending up more and more missions to orbit the Earth, do flybys of the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, anything we could get near. We saw a few oddities here and there as we went, But things stayed mostly silent for those few years. Maybe we just didn't notice it because we were so focused on the mission at hand. Then it finally happened, in '69, as you well know. We got to the moon, beat the Russians there after all. There was that big televised bit with Neil and Buzz taking the steps onto the surface and everything. I really hated those suits they had them in. Didn't get to accentuate Buzz's best features, for sure. That man had the best ass in this entire galaxy. This was one of the 5 tangents about Buzz Aldrin's physical features throughout the day. I've edited these out for the sake of mine and your sanity. You ever consider that we landed someone on the moon and sent up missions to land again and again for the next 3 years, then just quit cold turkey and never went back? Why do you think that is, huh? Hey, I thought you wanted to hear all this. At this point in time, she threw the remote of the television at me. I had retreated to my mental safe space during the Buzz Aldrin diatribe. Well, we did go back. A few times. This wasn't for scientific research we did the last 3 years. No, this was for anthropological purposes. We found things on the moon. We weren't the first beings there. No, we started finding small signs with the Apollo 14 mission. There were some little remnants of previous visitors. The first thing they found were some symbols carved into crater walls. Nothing we could translate, of course. Nobody knew what the hell they meant. But we knew they weren't naturally occurring. That much was obvious. So they took pictures of all the ones they found. Pretty sure they're still working on it to this day. They'll probably crack the Zodiac cipher before that damn thing. Apollo 17 was when they needed to carry this one on privately. That's the last manned moon mission that happened back in '72. For all the world knows, we ain't been back since. That's the way they want to keep it. Apollo 17 found way more than anyone previously had. They found full-on structures. Altars of worship is what it looked like. I can't even describe the images transmitted back. The way these things were built, it wasn't natural. There's no way that structures built that way would be allowed to stand. It was like the ghost of Lovecraft possessed Escher and made him design some messed-up church. We advised them not to go inside. We would send another mission up there with some better training and equipment to document all of this. That's where Apollo 18 to 22 came in. Before they left, though, they photographed the structure from every angle. We didn't notice until the end that it appeared absolutely identical, no matter what angle it was viewed from. 100% symmetry. Everything aligned perfectly, no matter how insane it was built up. Graham finishes the second glass of wine, leaning back in her chair. Well, I believe that's enough wine for 1 hour. Time for a good nap. All that talk of Buzz got me thinking about the old days. I turned off the recorder and ran from the room. I can still hear Graham cackling from downstairs. April 6, 2020. I'm going stir-crazy. Graham seems to get stronger every day somehow. It's like she's stealing my youth and thriving in isolation. This may end up being a record of me going insane with her stories mixed in. Let's go sit out on the porch. It's a nice day out. I'm tired of being cooped up in here. I can see that I could use some fresh air, but make her promise not to go near the neighbors or anybody walking by on the street. She gives me an entirely too sarcastic scout salute and swears she won't. All right, that's better. Feel my battery recharging already. Now, the moon church was what I was telling you about yesterday, right? That was insane. So, Apollo 17 found this crazy structure that was just perfectly built. Strangest architecture I'd ever seen. Made no goddamn sense to anyone how it remained standing after all this time. So we trained some other crews to go up after and look into it further. Specifically, we got a few people trained that had degrees in anthropology and ancient cultures. Maybe we could find some links here between this and things that had been found on Earth. Well, naturally, nothing is ever that easy. They head up there in 73, land smack next to the structure found by the previous mission, and get to it. By this point, technology has thankfully improved, so we have cameras in their helmets that allow us to see everything they see. They were in color, too. Thank God. I asked her how they had this kind of tech in 73 when a lot of things were still incredibly basic with video, especially transmitted over that vast a distance. You really think the stuff you saw from that time was the most advanced technology being used by the government? Don't underestimate the amount of money the American government will throw at something if they feel it's a threat. The cameras and equipment we had on those missions were on par with that little video camera your mama gave you for Christmas a few years back. She started talking about the GoPro she got 4 years ago. It records in 4K. What the hell? Now she's laughing at me again. Like I said, don't underestimate government spending. So, anyway, Apollo 18 was a 3-man crew. Jason Voss, Ben Codd, and Arthur Wayne. Wasn't too happy about Arthur going up there. We'd spent a few months together while he was training down at Cape Canaveral. God, if he could do half the things he could do in our gravity up there, if only I could edit my memory the same way I do this transcription. So they got to work. Jason stayed in orbit around the moon, making sure everything on the main ship was fine. Arthur and Ben went down to the surface and set up base camp. There was the structure, and not even 100 feet away was their little landing pod set up with everything in it. They were equipped for 3 days on the moon. First day goes off fine, just walking around the thing, taking measurements and samples. They determined that most of the structure is made from an unknown element. To this day, I don't think they've found out what it is. So, end of day 1, and they go back to their base camp. Now, we have a couple of cameras set up in the pod so we can see everything going on, just in case there's any issues technically, or, God forbid, something happens between them. Arthur and Ben are both fast asleep. We've got good feed playing in the command just to monitor and keep an eye on everything, and suddenly it glitches. Not a drawn-out one, though. Just a quick scramble, then it's back. Arthur and Ben are still there, asleep. Now there's a figure standing there in the airlock, though. Like nothing I've ever seen. Long limbs, big hands that almost look like bulldozers, and just a rounded-off nub right at the shoulders. I hit the intercom speaker for the capsule as fast as I could move, screaming at them to wake up. Poor Ben fell straight out of his bunk and onto Arthur underneath him, belly to belly. Now, that's something I normally would have paid to see, but right now my heart was racing for the wrong reasons. So they both scramble up and look toward the airlock. That damn thing is still just standing there. I think it was looking at them. Arthur shouts at it, asking what the hell it wants. There's this low garble of noise that happens. Nothing discernible. It could have been interference for all we know. But by God, I saw Ben's face drain of all the color when it happened. Arthur went a bit slack, looking from Ben to the creature. Then, as fast as it showed up, it was gone. Poof! Right into, well, guess you can't say thin air, being where it was. Ben sat down on Arthur's bunk and just cried. It took him a good hour to actually calm down. In the meantime, we had no idea what was happening. Finally, he chilled out enough for us to ask him what had happened. He said that thing looked at him. No eyes or anything, but he knew it was looking at him. It said, "She was never meant to live." Now this shook all of us. Almost a month before the mission, Ben and his wife suffered a miscarriage. She'd been 6 months along. They were expecting a little baby girl. Then one day the baby was just gone. No heartbeat, no activity. They didn't know what had happened. It tore Ben and his wife apart, though. They had a huge fight a week before liftoff because she didn't want him to go. Didn't want to lose another person she loved. I can't imagine what he felt when he heard that goddamn thing talk. They cut the mission short after that. Everyone was afraid of what may happen to Ben's mental state if anything else happened. They packed up quick and got the hell out of there. Ben drank himself stupid afterward, ending up driving his car off the interstate going 150 at around 3 in the morning. They barely got anything to bury. Graham wipes a stray tear from her eye. A man's jogging down the street with his dog coming closer to our house. Graham calls out to greet him. He walks up and begins talking, much to my displeasure. Graham is speaking inanimately and leans down to pet the dog. I remind her we're supposed to be distancing just to be safe. Sorry, Jiry, my grandson here is a hard ass. I'll see you some other time. Anyway, that was the end of Apollo 18. Not a whole lot found out, but we were ready to try again. I was just grateful that Arthur made it back in one piece. We were actually engaged, way back in the day before he went back up on the 19 mission in 74. I was a bit surprised at this. As far as I was told, Graham had never been married, and my grandfather had been killed in a car accident not long after she found out she was pregnant with my mother. We spent a lot of time together during that time. It was lovely. I miss that man. Arthur and Jason volunteered to go back on the 19 mission. I think Arthur was determined to get into that structure and see exactly what was going on with it. They had a new recruit along with them as well, Paul Orson. He was a former Green Beret during the Vietnam War. Tough SOB, and not one for conversation. They didn't know what they'd find, though, so they wanted someone with combat training to go up. Everything goes as normal. It's old hat at this point. They land in the same spot for base camp, Arthur and Paul this time. They got there on day one and set everything up, then decided to just rest up for a few hours and go straight in. Well, they didn't realize that they needed to find a way in first. Apparently, in all this time researching the structure, everyone just assumed there'd be a door somewhere. No such luck. Every wall on the outside was smooth, no cracks or seams signaling a door. They searched every damn inch of that thing, nothing to be found. Lo and behold, I'm watching in on Arthur's camera while he's walking around the structure. Even in low gravity, he had 2 left feet. He tripped and fell straight through the wall. We thought we had lost him for a minute. It looked like the camera had hit something and shorted out. Then he asked us if we were seeing it too. The interior of the structure was larger than the exterior. Way more room to move about. Lights hung in the air like stars, bathing everything around him in a soft glow. It was like its own miniature galaxy contained in that one building. Probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Arthur backed out then, wanting to make sure he could travel freely in and out of the structure before he got trapped there, and it seemed to work fine. It was like there was a portal, a thin veil, where it looked like a wall, but wasn't. He grabbed Paul and showed him what he'd found. Don't think he was too impressed. More like he was ready to shoot it if he could have found a gun. Exploring it further, they found a small spiral slope, almost like a ramp that went downward from the main chamber. They followed it for probably an hour before it got anywhere, seeing more of those strange symbols all over the walls on the way down. When they got to the bottom, it was like some kind of church. No idea what they worshipped or who, but there was an altar right there against the far wall. A statue rose up in a recess behind it. Looked to me like an elongated pyramid of sorts. Not really sure how to describe the geometry of it. There were angles that merged with smaller angles, curves where lines were. It was like my brain was trying to comprehend it through the camera feed, but just jumbled everything instead. That was about the time we noticed the spots on the altar. We're not 100% sure to this day what it was, but we had a good enough guess. It was dried, had obviously been there for quite a long time, but it still had that rusty red color that only comes from dried blood. It was splashed all over the place up there, like someone had slit the jugular and waved all about up there. Had to have been gallons spilled. That was enough for the 2 men for that day. They headed back up the base camp to make record of what they'd found and go back to sleep. They were out for maybe 2 or 3 hours when it happened again. The camera glitched just like last time, and that thing appeared. It wasn't in the airlock this time, though. It appeared right next to their damn bunks. We tried warning them, but it didn't seem to work. It's like our speakers were jammed. We were only able to watch in terror. That thing leaned over Paul and said something to him in that garbled noise we heard last time. God knows what it was. Then it was gone again. Nothing there. Paul got up and started putting on his suit to go outside then. I kept hitting the button, trying to ask what the hell was he doing. Got no response, though. Our line into the main capsule was dead. When he had the whole suit on, I tried the line going directly to his helmet. I said, "Paul, what the hell did that thing say to you?" You know what he told me? I shook my head in response. He looked straight up into the capsule camera before stepping out and said, "Finishing what they began." I still get chills thinking about that. It was one of the coldest things I've ever heard. By that time, Arthur had woken up and was getting his suit on as fast as he could. God, I begged him not to go after Paul, not into that goddamn church. Whatever was done in there before was bad, and there wasn't going to be anything good coming of it now. He was too good of a man, though. He got everything on and chased Paul in there. No idea how he had moved so fast. But Paul was waiting down there for him already, standing right on the altar and holding an old combat knife. Arthur shouted at him, asking what the hell he thought he was doing. He didn't say a damned word, just started lunging toward Arthur, brandishing that knife. I watched it. All of it. Each of their helmet cameras was on a different side of the big command screen. Our coordinator was shouting at me to tell them to stop, to get their crap together. It wouldn't have done anything. That wasn't Paul in that suit anymore. There was a blind rage in his eyes. His breathing in the mic was like an animal that had been cornered. No, he wanted to kill, and he didn't care who saw. They went back and forth for a while, throwing each other all around the unholy place. Finally, Arthur managed to wrestle the knife away from Paul. He stood up, holding it out in front of him. There were tears in his voice when he was talking, telling Paul to stay away, telling him they could go back home and have a drink, act like all this never happened. It didn't matter. Paul rushed, and Arthur had no choice. He ducked down and thrust the knife upward. The camera in Paul's suit was splattered with red as he depressurized in seconds. Arthur screamed, looking at that altar and throwing the knife at it. He just lay there for a while, sobbing and shouting curses. He was alone up there. Graham's voice cracked. I tried to transcribe the next part as best I can, but some parts were difficult to make out. Arthur started pulling Paul's body back toward him, the exit with him. Even if he had tried to kill him, he wasn't going to just leave him up there, all alone on a rock. He got to the top and tried to go through the wall back outside, but it was suddenly solid, no give. He tried the other walls, trying to make sure he wasn't using the wrong one in his emotional state. Nothing. Still no way out. He collapsed against the wall, taking in deep, shallow breaths. His oxygen tank only had about 10 minutes left by his count. The suits weren't designed for long outings back then. I hit the button to talk to him and tried to soothe him. He was almost hysterical, but I like to think hearing me helped him go quietly. I still remember seeing his face in that helmet camera. My last words to him, the little smile that he got right before he passed. He got to know that even though he was dying up here on a mission completely off the books, there would still be a part of him living on right here on Earth. Graham wiped tears away from her eyes. She had been openly sobbing, obviously, reliving something painful. I put my hand out for her to take. The last 3 missions they sent up there served 2 purposes. They were recovery missions to get those bodies back home and give them a proper burial, and demolition missions. They couldn't get back through the wall into the chamber the normal way, so they tried drilling through. There was no chamber, though. Just solid rock no matter how far they drilled into it. So they gave up after that. The next 2 missions brought explosives and detonated them around a structure, destroying it. We haven't gone back to the moon since then. Not after that loss. Even if we had, I wouldn't have worked the mission. I would have absolutely refused. I told them I wasn't taking on any more crewed landing missions after that. They'd have to find another communications head. She stared at me for a moment before looking back out toward the sky. The moon was already hanging there, right at the cusp of night. And she let out a long sigh. Some nights I look out at the moon and like to think he's still out there watching over me, watching over us. He'd be so proud that I'm finally telling someone this. He'd always talked about having a family and grandchildren one day. I think he's up there right now giving us that sly grin he always had. I'm sure he's proud of you, wherever he is. Graham looked for a moment more as I sat there, stunned. Then she got up, gave me a hug, and went back inside to get ready for bed. April 7th, 2020. I'm going to try to give Graham some space today. She still seems a bit out of it after last night. She stayed up to watch the pink moon. Said she felt better after seeing it, like Arthur was at peace up there. April 8th, 2020. She's back to her normal self. Well, look who's finally up. Thought I was going to have to draw a pentagram on the floor and summon you down there. Grab me that loaf of bread off the table. I've never wanted a grilled cheese this bad before in my life. All right, now, let's see. Did I tell you about Skylab yet? God, that was a mess if I ever saw one. They want you to think it just decayed out of orbit, but they knew what they were doing. They made sure that SOB went down in flames. She settles in with her sandwich and another glass of wine. I don't know where they come from. I only saw one bottle on the counter when I got here, and I don't recall getting any with the grocery delivery. I swear, she's some sort of witch. So we had about 4 crews up there that did different experiments and such. We had your normal run-of-the-mill stuff, working on plants and small animals, zero gravity, blah, blah, blah. Then the final crew came in. I about marched my ass down to the science department and smacked the hell out of every one of them when I saw what they brought up there with them. It was a goddamn block. Not just a block, though. It was a piece of debris from the temple on the moon. They were still trying to figure out what the hell it was made out of after all this time. So they're up there poking and prodding at it, trying to beat it and see how it reacts. These idiots don't have a damn clue what they're doing. They leave it in the lab one day after they're done, and the next thing you know, it starts growing right in front of us. It's just expanding. Growing outward and inward, taking over the entire compartment in Skylab. We don't understand how it's been in storage for so long, and it just now starts to do this? Maybe it was the proximity to the moon or something. Maybe whatever they were doing to it. I don't know. That thing took over half of the station by the time 24 hours had passed, though. Graham gesticulates wildly, stretching her arms out to show some measure of what had happened. So this thing is turning the station into a new version of the moon temple. There's protrusions coming from it, odd angles sloughing off here and there. It looked demented. They thankfully hightailed it out of there on the main shuttle right after it happened. The structure just kept taking more and more of it as it went. The cameras inside were still giving off a feed. That's the weird part. No matter how much this thing took over and reshaped all the metal and tubing of the station, the cameras kept going. We saw the small galaxy form right there in the lab. The crew quarters ebbed and changed, stretching until they resembled a hall of worship. That damned altar appeared at the end, the very same one. That was what sealed the deal for the superior officers. Skylab was obviously a lost cause. We didn't know how long this thing would keep growing up there, or where it would latch onto next. So they started working on sending a probe up there, carrying a payload. They were going to knock it straight out of orbit, either let it drift off into deep space or burn in the atmosphere. The whole time they were doing this, we were watching the cameras. I saw things on there, things that weren't meant for the human eye to see. On occasion, the feed would blink, and the altar hall would be filled with a writhing mass, creatures that looked like that same one that appeared on the moon. They'd be feeling, swirling around one another in a throng. It was some worship ritual or something. I don't know. Just as soon as it started, it would blink right back out. There were other creatures, masses of darkness, tendrils of light stretching from them. They didn't seem right for the space they were in, like they were somehow larger than the station, yet microscopic. They devoured one another with no care. It was its own contained environment up there. Finally, the payload was ready and sent up. We watched the feed as it hit, blowing a hole in the lab before knocking it into a decaying orbit. The worship started again, more frenzied this time. They were excited to be going to Earth. The crew was dispatched to clean up any wreckage that could be found. Not entirely sure what they did with it, but I hope it's buried as far as it can be. She finishes the glass of wine she had, getting up and hobbling toward the sink. She started the water and began to wash dishes. From then on, I think we made it a point to make sure all the testing and such was done in a more controlled environment. They started sending out more probes, too. Voyager was launched a few years later. We wanted to see what was beyond our little space in the galaxy. There's a lot, that's for sure. I remember when they told us Voyager had reached the edge of our solar system. We couldn't believe something had gotten that far. We looked in at some of the pictures it had taken along the way. There were the usual things that inspired awe, the stars, planets up close, far-off comets and asteroids. Then there was the follower. She shuts off the sink and comes to sit back down. Creepy little git, that thing was. Looked like a human male, honestly. Kind of tall, scrawny. He was naked from head to toe, not wearing a goddamn thing. She notices my look. Before you ask, no, it didn't have a dick. It just followed the Voyager like a lost puppy for a while, poking and prodding at it occasionally. We got plenty of close-up pictures of it, saw right into its eyes. The close-ups were what made us realize it didn't have eyes like a human. Instead, it had stars. They burned hot, almost causing a flare on the pictures. There was one where it opened its mouth and you could see a little void like a black hole, singularity and all. She shakes her head, letting out a little shudder. The weirdest thing was the message it transmitted. Perfect English. Sent it through the Voyager's onboard microphone as a microwave signal. When it came through and translated, it said, "So nice to meet you. I'm a bit early, but I'll be seeing your planet soon enough." That wasn't even the scariest thing Voyager picked up, though. Right before I retired in '99, it started sending back a signal. Took forever to decode because everything was so scrambled. After all that time, it was still a mess. Some language we didn't understand, and a cipher to go along with it. It was like someone had done a rushed job translating. What did it say? Turn back before it notices you, too. Graham said she wants to go get some air. I notice she's taking more time than usual to move, like it's hurting her. I ask if she's okay. Oh, these old bones are better than you'll ever be. Now, I'm going for a walk. Evening of April 9th, 2020. Graham asked to sit on the porch and watch the moon tonight, saying this is the last of her stories. Can't believe I've been retired for 20 years now. Seems crazy at this point, leaving the job, raising your kids. It was worth it, though. You turned out okay. She gives a little chuckle here. So there's two more things that happened right before I quit. One is a direct result of the other. Care to hear? I nodded. So in 97, we put the very first rover up on Mars. We started it looking to see if it could support life up there, trying to expand out beyond our own planet. Hell, it's already too crowded here. Has been since man first walked. Best thing about all this social distancing is I have an excuse to tell people to get lost. Pathfinder was something, though. Ugly little contraption. You wouldn't think it could get 10 feet, much less across a barren planet full of dust and rocks. But damn, that little thing moved. It was zipping here and there across the land, taking pictures and videos, scooping up samples, and analyzing them right then and there. Wondrous science. So we're all looking at these pictures being sent back, amazed at everything we're seeing. There's huge sand dunes, cliffs. This place is like a giant desert, but it's beautiful. That was when the first storm moved in. Storms up there aren't like ours. There's no rain, just wind and lightning. The wind stirs up the sand and makes it hard to see, blocks out most of the light. So Pathfinder is up there, sand and dust swirling around. Then, in a flash of lightning, you see this towering figure. It was thin, incredibly tall. Everything about it was disproportionate, though. It wasn't until the last flash of lightning that we connected it. It was another of those damn things from the moon, the ones that appeared when Skylab turned. This one was so much bigger, though, at least 10 times the size of the first one we saw. When this one spoke, we all heard it. It wasn't some garbled mess of noise this time. It was plain as day. After it happened, we all realized that we hadn't heard it out loud, though, but in our own minds, each one hearing the same thing. The temple will live on. We ruled and shall rule again, worshipping amongst the stars. Then it was gone, along with the storm. Never saw one as large as that again. Haven't seen any of them since then, actually. Pathfinder didn't have any other encounters up there the entire time, and as far as I've heard from the folks that are still working, they haven't found anything else out of the ordinary. NASA made it a point to contact the other countries and tell them about the temple at that point. Naturally, the Russians already knew about it, the bastards. Turned out they'd gone up to the moon at some point and found the ruins of the temple up there. Took some of it back with them and ended up having it lose all kinds of control back in '86. A lot of lives got lost up there because they didn't know what they were messing around with. They were experimenting with it in some underground lab when it went out of control. But, of course, what's their first reaction when a space temple and those damn things show up in their backyard? They nuke the thing straight to hell, killing a ton of their own citizens and covering up as some reactor meltdown. The footage they showed us, I'll never forget it. These bastards didn't even nuke it right away. That's why there was so much fallout. They let it go on for at least a week, absorbing everything and recording what happened. There were people inside that altar room when their worship session broke out. Those poor souls deserved so much more mercy than anyone could give them. After that, we all agreed that our first priority was protecting the Earth from whatever this was, not allowing any of that back down here. That was the time they started on the space station. Now, I don't know how much of what they've been up to recently with it, since it was being just launched when I retired. They built it to keep a better eye on things out there in orbit, though, where they could conduct experiments and run some countermeasures right there without anyone here on Earth being any the wiser. Smart move, I think. I know now, long before I left, they had a satellite that found that chain of bodies again. The same one that took the first manned crew up there. We could hear the whispers being transmitted back. I still wake up some nights hearing those whispers. What did they say? Come to us. Be sacrifices. Float eternal as a living altar to them. Them? Beats the hell out of me. Maybe it was that big thing they saw in the photos. Maybe that's what the temple was built to worship. Or whatever we were warned about by the follower. There are so many things we still don't know about, What's out there? Probably things we'll never know. It's all just lost in the vastness of space, never meant to be understood. We're still here, though. That's something. So they've been keeping us safe until now. Maybe it's something else, though, watching over us. The moon was out in full on the horizon now, shining bright as it rose further. Graham got up and walked out onto the moonlight, looking upward. I know you're there, Arthur. I know you're watching over all of us. You stayed up there because you were a stubborn old bastard, thinking you had to do everything to keep people from seeing what you saw. I felt you the other night, though. That full moon, you were there. We're going to dance in the moonlight together again real soon. I love you. Graham tells me she's going to stay out here a while. I'm going to go up and start transcribing all of this. Maybe get some actual relaxation in. I'm tired of being stuck in this damn house. Graham was dancing around in the moonlight as I walked back inside, humming Fly Me to the Moon to herself as she did. April 10th, 2020. Graham passed away early this morning. I'd walked into the kitchen for a drink and noticed the front door was still cracked open. This wasn't normal for 2 a.m, so I walked out to check. Graham was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, drenched in bright moonlight. She had a smile on her face. She died peacefully in her sleep, carried off into the moonlight by the one she loved. That was Fly Me to the Moon by Ross Tyson, performed by yours truly. Space is full of wonders, and sometimes graveyards.
I'll stick to Earth, thanks. I've seen what happens when you bring back moon rocks. Sometimes the rocks bring you back instead.
Ross Tyson is one of the many dark talents working with our friends at Velox Books. For more cosmic chills and earthly nightmares, visit veloxbooks.com and bring a flashlight. You'll need it.
If you enjoyed tonight's journey through Cold War tunnels, cursed lunar labs, forgotten arcades, and battlegrounds soaked in blood and secrets, you're in luck. There's more waiting for you in the patrons area. Extended, ad-free episodes featuring bonus tales and exclusive horrors you won't hear anywhere else.
It's just $7.99 a month, or save big with a yearly plan, and it gives you full access to every story, every scream, without a single commercial break. You'll be supporting indie horror and making sure the doors to the dark stay open.
To join, just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab, or go straight to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to become a member. Come closer to the stories, if you dare.
From all of us here at Chilling Entertainment, thank you for your support.
If tonight's episode proved anything, it's that some places aren't just creepy, they're hungry. An underground lab that never really shuts down, a cabin where the wind has teeth, a lover who won't let go until you're nothing but code, a wolf in uniform, a moon base that still whispers.
Tonight was a reminder that some thresholds are meant to remain untouched, and some records are sealed not by accident, but by intention. But horror doesn't need permission. It leaks in, through data cables, torn wallpaper, frost-covered windows, and old games that somehow know your name.
If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our parent channel, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new nightmare.
We also want to hear from you. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and tell us which story stuck with you tonight, or which ones you were too afraid to finish alone.
And let's not forget to thank the extraordinary authors who led us into tonight's forbidden places. Without their imaginations, we'd still be safe.
But safe is boring. So, the next time someone dares you to open a sealed bunker, walk into a blizzard, or click play on something you probably shouldn't?
Remember, some places weren't forgotten, they were quarantined. Sleep well, listeners.
If you can.
Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.